so let's see what we've got with political parties. Bobby, tell me what your interpretation of this cartoon is.
It seems like he's saying that third parties that aren't major parties just kind of are garbage votes. Like they don't count for anything.
Okay, I like that. Anybody have anything drastically different? Okay, voting for a third party is like throwing your vote away. Just out of curiosity, would any of you vote for a third party candidate?
Yep.
Okay, I have two, so we're going to try to kind of reconcile that because I know full well that that is a reality. I will tell you that third parties are more successful in state and local government. Like you will find that you'll have like Libertarian and Green Party and Independents and things, especially in local government. Depending on where you go to college, you might find them more pervasive in certain areas of the country. And then even at the state level, like we've had I don't know if it was your class we were talking about, there was a governor a couple years ago in Minnesota. Was it your class that we were talking about that? He was independent. His name is Jesse Ventura. And back in the day, he was a WWF wrestler, Jesse the Body Ventura, before WWE, so like a long time ago. Anyway, but he did get into politics and he won governor. I mean, he was governor of Minnesota, so it's not unheard of. And he was like a legitimate, real leader. Anyway, okay. So second question, Maddie McConnell, will you read the question to me, please? The next one, not the interpretation, but the one that comes after that. So I guess number 11.
Identify and explain how two rules of the United States electoral system act as obstacles to minor party candidates winning election.
Okay, so if this were an FRQ, you would have to say what it is, you'd have to provide me a definition, and then you'd have to put it into some kind of context to tell me how and why that would keep the third party candidate from winning. And so I think that would be pretty easy, like to put it into some kind of example. Okay, so your table. Tell me the two, like what are two things y'all came up with?
10% of the vote and a ballot signature.
Okay, what does the 10% of the vote mean? I don't know what that means.
Like,
Have 10% of the vote to get funding.
Are y'all talking about the public funding?
yeah.
Is that what you're talking about? Okay, all right. And so I think that the law might have changed from the election of 2000. So remember when we learned about campaign finance? I'm really glad that y'all got that. That's awesome. When we talked about campaign finance law, remember we acknowledged that there is public funding for the presidency, but in order to get that money, you have to prove that you're a viable candidate. So I couldn't just say, I'm going to run for president and get all this money. So Nader, part of his strategy in the election of 2000 was, if we can get enough people to vote for us, then the Green Party will qualify for public funding in 2004, which means that they'll have more money. It's difficult, it's harder for a third party candidate, because does your textbook say it's 10% now? Is that where you got that number, you guys?
I took that from the slides, but I did this before and I looked it up and it said 10.
Did it say 10? Okay, so it may totally have changed. I mean, and that's totally reasonable that it has changed. So that's what it was back then, but who knows? Okay, so public funding makes it difficult. That's one electoral rule, okay? I need a second one. Erica, what's the second one?
Clauses.
Oh, we did plurality and
Plurality of what?
of the election.
What election?
So basically like the whole winner take all kind of idea.
Okay.
Like if they don't, like if they only get a small amount, but then they still wouldn't be able to get the majority.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, so the electoral rule would be the winner take all elector system for the presidency. So we've established that the winner take all feature of the electoral college marginalizes third party candidates because whoever gets a plurality of the votes wins all the electors. And it's difficult for those third party candidates to ever reach a plurality. Okay, so that would be a second rule. I need a third one. Nathan, did you guys get a third one? No? No? Michelle, did y'all get a third one?
No, we have public financing and winner take all.
Okay. There's one that we talked about last class. I drew you a picture of a state that has to do with the legislature.
Single member districts.
Good. Single member districts. So remember that single member districts is the same reasoning and logic as the winner take all system, but it relates to the legislature. That in every legislative district we choose one person to go to the House of Representatives, but that third-party candidates often fail to win the plurality because of their lack of media and money and all that kind of stuff, and so they tend to not win. So if you were given this question, do you think it would be okay to use both of those? Because they seem like the same, but you totally could because they're different rules, and so that's totally fine. There's one more that's not as specific, but it relates to getting on the ballot. If you remember, I told you that it's really hard in some states for third-party or independent candidates to get their name put on the ballot. One example would be that in Texas, if you want to run for governor and you're not Republican or Democrat, you have to have 50,000 signatures of registered voters before they will put your name on the ballot. That's hard. That's a huge amount of people to kind of get in your corner, and so we just make it a little bit more challenging. Uh-huh.
Could you have the single member districts again?
Okay, so think about a map of Texas. We are split into 36 legislative districts. We happen to be in District 3. So when I go vote today in the primary, the only candidates like on my, or let's jump forward to the November election. When I go to vote, there's going to be a list. There will be a Republican, a Democrat, and probably a Libertarian. And I'll vote, and everybody will, but the Libertarian might get a huge percentage of the vote, but if they don't get the most, they don't get to win the seat. They don't win and represent that area. And it's just difficult for third-party candidates to ever win the most in any district, even though 20-30% of the population might choose them. So it applies specifically to the House of Representatives. Nicole?
So could you still use the example of single member districts even though it has nothing to do with the electoral college?
Yeah, because it's not asking you specifically about it's just electoral rules.
So electoral system doesn't
Mm-mm. Electoral college is only for the presidency, but electoral system is just how we elect people. So yeah, and those are both really good rules to use as an example. All right, the next question. Connor, what does the next question say? We got 10, 11, and 12.
Minor parties make important contributions to the United States political system in spite of the institutional obstacles to their candidate's success. Describe two of these positions.
All right, so we need to know why minor parties still matter. Kaylani, tell us something that minor parties do for us.
They get people to vote.
Okay, they encourage civic participation in general. I think that is a great way to think about it. You know, that could be one thing we could say positive about Trump. Maybe he has brought new people into the electorate, people who might not have voted before, and the same could be said for a third party or an independent candidate. All right, I like that one. Danielle, give me another one.
They bring issues that you wouldn't think of to light.
Oh, awesome. They can push the envelope. They can talk about things and promote issues that the major parties ignore because they're trying to appeal to such a broad mass of people. When Ralph Nader ran, one of his big issues was to raise the minimum wage. In 2000, the minimum wage, if I remember correctly, was $4.25. And I know that sounds really low to you guys, but that was 16 years ago, okay? So, and he advocated raising the minimum wage to $8 an hour. Well, you've had economics. That would be quite a shock, right? But when he says that, what that does is it causes the other candidates to have to take a position on it because he's brought it up and he's put it out there. Okay. All right, give me another thing, Kent.
When parties are unpopular, they can change their positions on issues.
Yeah, definitely. It can actually give the parties an opportunity to evolve and change because they're like an impetus for change. I love that. Okay, what else do we have? What impact do third parties typically have on national elections? They split the vote. I like to call that being an election spoiler. I'm not sure if that's the specific term, but it works. Every time that I can think of in history that we have had a significant third-party candidate, they have served to negatively affect their side of the political spectrum. So the classic example that I know your history teacher spent a good amount of time on was the election with Teddy Roosevelt. Remember, he had been a Republican, and then he chose not to run again, was unhappy with the direction of the Republican Party, and what did he do?
Third party.
Yeah, he started the Bull Moose Party, and what that did is it caused the Republicans to lose, and we got a Democrat elected as a result of that. Happened in '92, happened in 2000, could happen again this year. We'll see what happens, okay? All right, many of you said you would vote for a third party. You know all of these things, so what is another value that third parties offer us?
Alternative?
It's an alternative. So why, Chris, if it's an alternative and you're a smart guy and you know all of this, why would you still vote for them knowing that they won't win? Would you?
Wishful thinking.
Okay. Wishful thinking, just hope. I saw your hand first, Katie.
It's better than voting for someone that you don't want elected.
Okay. Okay, good. Nicole?
Also, it's kind of the mandate thing, so if they see that one candidate, even though he lost, got maybe 5% of the vote, then they would consider adopting some of their policies.
Yeah. Is that what you were gonna say, Jaya?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a message. You guys remember that an election is a linkage institution. So I don't remember what year it was, but it was in Texas. We had a gubernatorial election, and I just could not stand the Republican or the Democrat. And I'm like, I have to vote, like that's important to me. I feel like I have an obligation. I'm like, I cannot vote for either one of these ridiculous people. And there was a third party candidate whose bio was just so silly, and I can't, I mean, it was bizarre. It was something to do with about space, I remember, and like whatever. And I will proudly say that I voted for that person, knowing full well that they weren't gonna win, but to me it was like a protest vote. It was I know, it's embarrassing now, but it's like an outlet for a frustrated voter. People who believe in the system, and I have to keep wondering how many people in this election that's guiding their behavior. You know, like is when you support a candidate, are you actually supporting the candidate, or are you just mad at the system, and so because that candidate represents contrary to that system, you're trying to send a message. And sometimes it works. You know, we'll see. You know, if Donald Trump wins today, that is a message to the Republican Party that perhaps they've ignored a segment of the population.
Stomach just kinda turned.
Yeah, there's a good chance I might not be here tomorrow. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, all right. So you guys got that? All right. We have one final concept then that we need to look at. I don't know who I haven't called on today. Jaya, will you read the next question for us then?
Define party polarization. How is this phenomenon different amongst the components of the party?
Okay. So I'm gonna show you guys a short little video clip. It's political scientist at Oklahoma State, Danielle, and she is gonna talk to you about these concepts. Party polarization. Ken actually mentioned it earlier. He talked about how if you elect Republicans and Democrats and we have divided government, that should cause them to moderate, but the opposite is actually happening. So she's gonna talk to you about that, but she's gonna talk about it in terms of the different parts of the party. She's gonna use different language than I did. So when she talks about the mass party, that's party in the electorate. That's you and I. When she talks about the elite part of the party, that's party as an organization or party in government. Okay? So just listen to what she says and see if we can kind of draw the answer out, and then we'll look at this chart.
Have a number of different things that they can consider when looking at the broad landscape of political parties. So some people might focus on more of the structure of parties. So when we think about party organizations, we can look at differences between how Democrats and Republicans organize themselves, and there's a lot of differences in how they form their committees, how they hold their conventions, how they select their delegates. We also can make comparisons across states and how their parties differ in terms of how they organize themselves. Another level outside of kind of a structure, we can look
That is horrible.
at partisanship in terms of the electorate. So how people come to identify themselves with being a Democrat and Republican. And in fact, most of the early kind of political behavior research on political parties really did try to identify how people considered themselves to be partisan and what it really meant to say, I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican. Currently, much of the research that we see in terms of political parties is focusing on party polarization. And this is pretty much a buzzword that you're going to hear in the media. The extent to which our political parties